In Croatia, what I've seen this week is that the implementation is uneven. Well, there are places where it's really good. I must say, I can point out that the Ombudsman's office as an institution is very, very good. It's not often that you find an Ombudsman's office like this, an independent institution dedicated only to the rights of people with disabilities. I think that is really fantastic. I think also on deinstitutionalization, I think Croatia has made some progress on getting people with disabilities out of institutions and into the community. That's really important. And that's not easy, it's very difficult. And then, you know, it's uneven in the sense that if you look at other areas like employment and education, Croatia is not doing that well as it should be.
When it comes to education, what could be done?
Well, Croatia ratified the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. So if you ratify, then the United Nations would expect governments to implement these treaties. And what the Convention suggests, the articles, especially Article 24, that education, that there be mainstream education for people, inclusive education for people with disabilities. So what we would like to see is that as many disabled learners as possible be in mainstream schools, that there be an inclusive education system. To do that requires some adaptation of the built environment, the school environment, and teachers to be trained on teaching learners with special needs. And sometimes it requires special teaching assistants. And these are the main things. Now, there's a number of examples in many countries that have done inclusive education in quite successful ways. I can think of the government of Canada, maybe Australia, United Kingdom, and so forth. They've got inclusive education system that has worked quite well. There are many others. Civil society would present their case in a different way. Let me put it that way. Governments would say that we are providing so much in terms of healthcare, and civil society would say, well, that's not enough, we want more. And that's the same not only in Croatia, but everywhere in the world. So in that sense, you know, there's a discrepancy often in many countries.
So what will be stated in your report?
You have to wait for the report. No, I think that my overall impression is that you have quite strong institutions that support the implementation of the convention. And then on the more difficult questions of deinstitutionalization, for instance, you have an excellent example at the Zagreb Center for Rehabilitation, where they have been working for the past 17 years on how to get people with intellectual disabilities back into the community. And they've succeeded to do that. And in September of this year, they are going to finally have all the people that could be placed in communities will be placed in communities. Now that's a remarkable achievement for Croatia and for everybody else. And I would write in my report that one of the things is that example, you know, we need to investigate it a bit more and write it up so that we can share it with the rest of the region. Because institutionalization has been a problem for this part of the world in Eastern Europe. It's been part of the history of dealing with people with severe disabilities, an unfortunate history. Now, the other thing that I think is very good, as I said before, is this institution of an Ombudsman's office dedicated to disability. That I haven't seen anywhere else in my observations in different countries. It's normally part of a general ombudsman's office or a human rights commission or council, but not a standalone institution like the one you have here. And I think this model is really good. So that is what I will say in my report. But some of the things that I think needs a bit more attention is that I found it to be a disadvantage if the government ministries who are responsible for implementing the CRPD, if they are not able to coordinate themselves. So I think they should have regular meetings, for instance, on a monthly or bi-monthly basis. When I met with them, that wasn't clear if they had those meetings, if they're able to coordinate their activities in a better way. I think there are many other areas where Croatia can do better. On education, I think they can demonstrate some inclusive education if they want to. I think they should pay more attention to that. And then generally, I think that the unemployment as well, but let me just say that one of my observations was that I found the level of awareness and understanding of human rights and the culture of human rights to be lacking. I don't think there's enough of an understanding of what the Convention on People with Disabilities actually is. And when I say there's a lack of understanding, I mean in society generally, but amongst people with disabilities and their organizations as well. Now, the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities is a human rights instrument, right? And if a government ratifies it, it accords those human rights to people with disabilities. They are now the rights holders. The government is obligated then to protect, promote, implement those rights. So I found in my interaction with civil society organizations that they did not understand that they are rights holders. Well, let me give you an example of rights holders that holds governments to account. I think it was about 2 years ago that in one African country, the organizations of people with disabilities complained to the government that the voting stations during elections, the places where they go and cast their votes, were not accessible. Now, I know that voting rights to disabled people have been restored in Croatia, and I'm assuming that all efforts have been made to ensure that the voting stations are accessible. But let me go back to what happened in this country in Africa. The government had these inaccessible voting stations for the elections. The organizations of disabled persons took the government to court because they could not access their right to vote. And the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities guarantees them the right to vote, political participation. So the court then ruled in favor of disabled people based on the fact that the government, by ratifying the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, ensured their right to vote and their other human rights. So in that case, the court then compelled the government to ensure that in future all voting stations are accessible. I'm not suggesting that organizations here in Croatia start taking the government to court, but I'm trying to demonstrate what rights holders, what it means to hold certain rights based on an international treaty ratified by your government. Well, I'm saying also that the level of awareness of human rights, in this case among people with disabilities and perhaps in society generally, I don't think there's a great level of awareness and understanding.
To which other country could you compare Croatia with similar problems like Croatia?
You know, I don't like to make comparisons because histories are different, the resources are different and all of these kinds of things. But I mentioned Canada because I believe that each country, no matter how poor you are, should look at what is the best practice in the world. And, you know, if you're going to look at a comparison like yourself, you know, then you end up with quite a mediocre example. What you really want to do is what is the best in the world. I'm sure Croatians want to be the best in the world as well. I'm not saying, I'm not, let me be very clear. I'm not going to rate anybody in terms of who's the best and who's the worst. What I'm saying is, you have to look at what's best practice, you know, even if you don't have the resources to do the same. But you can at least learn or have a vision of what it could be like. Let me just mention something that I also found to be really good about, let me rather say Zagreb and not the whole of Croatia. One good thing about your capital city in this time that I've been here is the impression that one gets about the environmental accessibility. And the good thing is that wherever you go in Zagreb, you see the parking spaces with the access sign, the wheelchair sign, the blue and white parking spaces. I think that's wonderful because, you know, if you're a disabled person coming into Croatia for the first time and you come into the capital city and you see all of this, it immediately gives you the impression that this is a place that I won't have problems getting somewhere. You know, so that's a very, very important point I'm trying to make, because it goes with the perception that any person with a disability will have of your country. And that gives you immediately a positive impression. I found that to be really good. That's a really good thing.